I would like to welcome Annemarie van der Hoeven in our next episode of Basture Conversations, a series of dialogues with people from arts and culture about slowing down and contemplating the future in the aftermath of the first global pandemic. Annemarie van der Hoeven studied history of art with a specialization on the 17th century in painting. She worked closely with and for Swiss-based David Kutzer Gallery. Ms. van der Hoeven is also an independent art consultant and an evaluator of art, mother of 3 and an avid kickboxer. Welcome.
Thank you.
How has the lockdown affected your private and professional life?
How has it affected my private and professional life? I think from a personal point of view, you shouldn't underestimate it. I actually caught COVID-19. I know I caught it through my work, working at an art fair, and it's highly contagious and should not be underestimated. I think from a personal point of view, I think I'm a really positive person, and I think that it has brought a lot to my personal life, because I think it gave me some time to reflect and appreciate our current, the time that we live in at the moment.
And professionally, did you feel any impact on your daily activities? Was business as usual?
I think it definitely had an impact, because the art world initially came to a complete standstill. Yeah. And I hope that other people realize that, or certainly made me realize, and many of the art lovers and people working in the art world, it made us realize that art is actually an essential aspect of our daily lives. I think art, in a way, is a reflection of its time frame. And funnily enough, as an art advisor or an art lover and a collector, we all like to predict what is en vogue, what will stand the test of time. However, the reality is, I think we have to be at least 50 years on to realize who the great names of this time really will be. I think these artists, or pieces of art specifically, they are a reflection of our time.
Why is the 17th century painting? What made you? What has driven you to study this in specifics? Because art history has, with 3,000 years of written history, much more in the visual arts.
I think as a child, I always had a love of art, and my grandfather was an amateur painter, and he would always take me out in the garden and we would paint a tree, and he would teach me how to look. For instance, in kindergarten, I had to paint a tree. It was going to be an assignment a following week, so I told my grandfather, and then he said, let's go and paint the tree. So I, brown, green blob on top, and my grandfather said, let's have a look at it closely. The tree has branches and leaves. And so we painted a proper tree. I think I was 6 or 7 at the time. And to great acclaim, and my kindergarten teacher were most impressed. And that instilled in me a love of art and an appreciation. And when I came to decide what to study at university, I decided to go for what I was passionate about. And I think for Northern European art, the 17th century is essential. I think it was a time of great innovation and change that a lot of people may not fully grasp, because everything is figurative, it is what you see, but at the same time, in short, it is the first time in art that artists started to paint true to life. The invention of individual subject, marine painting, still life painting, tobacco painting, flower, still lives, all different subjects, which previously were part of religious altarpieces. And I think what the 17th century teaches you a number of things. First of all, I think the artists were incredibly well schooled. I think
You mean in terms of craftsmanship?
in terms of craftsmanship, they could draw and paint, were very innovative. I think if you look at an artist like Rembrandt, you see he uses and applies techniques, painting with the back of the brush, the palette knife, layer upon layer, scraping it off. Those are things that perhaps resonate with Jackson Pollock or much more experimental artists of the 20th century. So a lot of things, I would almost dare say that almost everything that happens in art today has already been done in the 17th century.
Okay.
I think if you train your eye in the 17th century, it also gives you a little bit of an eye for true talent in the decades, centuries to come. So I think that's certainly very, very interesting and valuable. And also, it's important. I understand sometimes that people think of old master paintings as a little bit boring, you like it or you don't, but actually every decade, every century, the appreciation of art, in my opinion, is the same. 10% or 5% of artists are actually truly innovative and change time, change perception forever. And that's the same in the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, and today. And the rest of it is also there and has some sort of a function, but it's not that special, and it's not a reflection of the time. And I think when we look, because for me sometimes it's difficult to look at contemporary art.
We get back to that.
So I encourage people to look at the 17th century art and understand that for the first time artists had the audacity to go out into nature, to paint en plein air, to take an easel and paint and draw what they saw, and to paint lifelike. A lot of art in 17th century is, a still life, very valuable, very beautiful. But that was a tulip bulb sold in 1632 for some 32,000 guilders. That's amazing, but a painting of that was almost like a photograph. It's really like capturing a moment in time, and that's with Dutch landscape, with the particular play of light. So flowers still live, those flowers are valuable, they wilt. So if you look at the next centuries with the same appreciation, you try to imagine how it was created and with what incentive, then you probably appreciate it more. Having said that, I think there's only a fraction of art created that actually stands the test of time, that is timeless.
You make the 17th century sound very exciting. But speaking of 17th century, in recent years, you have also shown interest in contemporary art, also in collecting contemporary art. How would you define the difference between these two?
I think if I were to collect 17th century art, I would covet works by Adriaan Korte, Willem van der Velde the Elder, Willem Kalf, truly exquisite artist Frans Hals, A Small Landscape by Rembrandt. And those are things you can only dream of, and actually they should be in museums and should be enjoyed in public. So I think it's much more, it's just interesting, and it's really nice to collect on a personal level, specifically outside of your professional field. Mm-hmm. And I think I think collecting is really a bonus to your personal life. For me, they are milestones throughout my life. I know exactly when I bought the first pieces, or why I fell in love with it, or my husband and I fell in love with it. Sometimes I have our children give input as to what they like. It's just a real joy. Yeah. And the collection changes. I've sold a few pieces or given something away. So it's something that is very much alive, and it's really wonderful. I appreciate it all. Sometimes I rehang it, and yeah.
A lot of the 17th century paintings you talked about are dealing with the subject of nature, landscapes, still lives. Why do you think nature played such an important role in artists' interest?
I think because nature is so challenging to capture it in the correct way. Nature is ever changing simply because of the play of light.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's difficult enough to draw or paint a still life.
For me too.
And then you can do it. And then to for someone to paint something, to paint it accurately, so that you can almost you believe that it's real, if that is your incentive.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or so that you can smell it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a real challenge, and I think the connection between art and nature are quintessential. I think in the 17th century, in the literal sense,
yes.
and in contemporary and modern art, it takes a different dimension. Where
Which is it?
I think, again, for today's art, I think the art that will stand the test of time will, on a personal or on a general level, it makes a connection between human nature, art, and nature.
Mm-hmm.
And
So you mean human activity versus nature?
I think that what I'm trying to say is sometimes something is created with a personal incentive,
Mm-hmm.
but it ends up being appreciated on a much wider basis. So
Yeah.
you don't know that.
No, it's out of your control all the
It's
times.
very much out of your control. And I think also I can imagine a lot of contemporary and modern artists have started making sculpture on a personal level, and then that has evolved and has now taken on a point where it's integrated with landscape and becomes public.
Speaking of public spaces, many people talk about how slowing down during the COVID-19 pandemic helped them find something they have lost or rediscover. Should art be the new pandemic? Can art help us slow us down, for example, in public spaces?
Well, I think the bus chair, to me, when we've had many conversations about this, to me this is potentially such an important work, because how we have talked about it and discussed it, we would envision placing it in a beautiful setting, many different options, 12 different marble bus chairs in a circle, 1.5 or 2 meters apart, and you could place it for contemplation, consideration, appreciation on a group level, but also on an individual sort of level. So it's meant to connect, and we've discussed this as well, but the bus chairs, there are many places, I think, where it would work beautifully. I think personal preference for me would be the Garden of Voorlinde, but that's because I am Dutch, and I think the connection of Voorlinde with the beautiful garden, and then those beautiful window panes on the inside of the museum with black frames, which is very 17th century. So you make it sort of like a painting in the landscape, and then you have the connection with the art, and you can just appreciate nature and art all at once. But you could also place it on a square outside of a train station, or at an airport, or in a desert. I think the possibilities are limitless, and it's an invitation. I think we actually should invite people to suggest where the group of bus chairs could be placed.
You're a big fan of Jan Schoonhoven,
I am a bit
one
of
of the
fan.
strongest voices of the Zero. Am I correct? What is it about Jan Schoonhoven that moves you? Does it remind you of things that you have seen in nature, or are in some way the rhythms and the shadows that are soothing to your mind? What spell has he put on you?
I think it's the beauty of simplicity that moves me. I think patterns and repetition are very soothing to the soul.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to learn.
Really? So it wasn't understanding and a love at first sight?
I think by seeing a lot of art through the years.
Okay.
You appreciate, you learn to appreciate things more, and you grow into your own voice.
Mm-hmm.
So Schoonhoven for me is something that I appreciate, and unfortunately the rest of the world has now caught on.
Mm-hmm. Too late.
Yeah, too late, too late. But yeah, no, I've learned that there is something in simplicity, also in sculpture and repetition. Schoonhoven has a lot of reference to architecture, and sometimes not so obviously, but sometimes to nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to recognize that. Yeah.
Once upon a time, all the rivers combined to protest against the action of the sea in making their waters salt. When we come to you, said they to the sea, we are sweet and drinkable. But when once we have mingled with you, our waters become as briny and unpalatable as your own. The sea replied shortly, keep away from me and you'll remain sweet. How can we go about living on this planet without making so much mess? Can art seed hope into the seemingly inevitable existence and pessimistic prognostics about the future of our planet?
I think today's art certainly can. I think we're at a transition in so many different fields when it comes to politics, when it comes to ethnicity,
Yes.
when it comes to our appreciation of the earth and how we should appreciate it. And I think that's very important. That's why I am a big fan of your work, because you have your work to me reveals great appreciation of nature.
Thank you.
You focus on the intelligence of nature. You have a lot of patterns and repetition in your work, and I think what your work means to me is that nature, especially the honeycomb pieces, that we can manipulate nature a little bit.
Invite nature.
Invite. Basically you're leading an orchestra, but don't be mistaken, nature and the earth are much more powerful. And
Exactly.
I think that's what I appreciate in your work, why I think it is such a good reflection of today's frame of mind, because people are slowly starting to realize it, and people are also starting to find their own voice and to understand that if we say stop, no more plastic, or we have to recycle, or many artists are using recycled material to produce
change
wonderful
our habits,
things.
wanting less, wanting
Exactly.
different.
Yeah. So that is what that means to me.
The last part of my interview or conversation with you is called Fire Questions. I have a series of 5 questions in the form of either or, and you have to answer really fast. So without much hesitation. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Oil or acrylic?
Oil.
Finding Nemo or Frozen?
Frozen.
Garden or forest?
Garden.
Turtle or rabbit?
Rabbit.
Caspar David Friedrich or William Turner?
Turner.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for the
Thank
compliments. I would like to give you a gift as a thank you for accepting this invitation of mine. It's the replica of the chair you're sitting on. So I hope it serves as a memory of looking back and contemplating.
And the chair is very comfortable.
Thank you very much.